All right, welcome to the Sumer Sports Show, Wednesday edition, November 8th. We're into week 10 of the NFL season. I can't believe we're already to week 10. I'm Eric Eager. I'm one of the VPs at Sumer Sports. I'm joined by the CEO of Sumer Sports, Thomas Dimitroff. Thomas, this season has blown by, man. I can't believe we're already this far in. When you think about, the two lives that you've lived, one is in the NFL, but let's say specifically as a general manager with the Atlanta Falcons, and now as the CEO of a sports analytics startup. In which role does the league season move faster, and which one does it move slower?
I don't know. I mean, they're both fast moving in their own way. They both have their stresses, of course. But I swear to God, we mentioned in episode 20, whatever Monday was. Geez, I'm trying to keep up with it all. That we had our data analytics group in here, right? So we have 15 people in here right now, churning away. I mean, you open the door, it's like this wave of, like, in my mind, this unbelievable intelligence swirling around in our building here, which excites me because I think the more people can get, smarter, of course, in the NFL, the more they'll be interested in using data to augment. And these guys out there and gals are working so hard to bring something to the forefront that most general managers really don't have a clue of how far it's coming or how far it's come in the evolution, right? I can go on and on about that, but talk Sumer for a minute here, because you know that you were up there yesterday. Today you're working from home, and I'm just feeling it here. Like, they're coming up with new ideas. They'll drag me in every once in a while to show me what they're doing. But of course, I don't have the background and the knowledge and the brain that you have with a PhD in microbiology or whatever it is. Math microbiology. What is it? Biomes?
Math biology was the subfield of math that I did it. Yeah, I mean, I think what's really cool is, I think you're selling yourself short. I mean, a lot of the discussions are talking about like stuff that and we're going to talk a little bit, actually a really interesting math problem later on that you had to tackle when you were the general manager of the Atlanta Falcons. But, it's so much fun. Just, you get in these groups, right? And we're pretty big now. We're about 40 data scientists, engineers, and everything. And it's like, you only talk to a certain number of them. And then when you're management like me, you only talk to even fewer of them. So it's fun. Like Udit Ranazaria, for example, formerly of the Browns, like comes in. We just talk about team building for a little bit. And like over time, how my views on coverage and pass rush and team, on age curves and all this kind of stuff have evolved over time. And it's really fun just to sort of go through those notions and to know that this is a practice, right? Like you think about, doctors, they talk about their practice, lawyers talk about their practice. And the reason they do it is because a lot of these things aren't solved. You think about like, and I'm not going to get political, but like you think about COVID-19, like the hardest problem was like, it was an unknown. We had no idea how, lockdowns would work, vaccines would work, whether they would work at all. And in football, it's kind of the same thing. Like I sent an email to your former colleague, Scott Pioli, where we're talking about, why is NFL offense down? And it's like, well, it's because teams got scared of Patrick Mahomes and they started running too high. And then so NFL teams started running the football more. And last year they were more efficient at it. And this year, for whatever reason, whether it be running backs are kind of aging out a little bit or defensive linemen are sturdier against the run, we have not seen efficiency running the ball, even against 6 or 7 man boxes, which are usually advantageous. And so this whole thing, it's like, if we ever thought we had the answer, like the answer is a moving target, and we're constantly trying to move faster than the target is. This one, Thomas, I really like, by the way. I have not shown this to you, but somebody from Ravens Kingdom here, Geno Stone. Geno Stone was my favorite one of my favorite players coming out of his draft in the 7th round, and is now like, I think he's like leading the league in interceptions. But yeah, it's even to that point, like, if you think you have the answer, another Ravens fan in Beat Gamer 99, Geno's a baller. It's like, but again, if you think about what's so cool about Sumer is like we're moving quickly, and the question is can we move faster than the league does, because the league is moving fast as well.
Wait a minute, I want to go back to the Raven fans for a second. I mean, no mention of Eric DeCosta being the true baller there, the true baller builder. I mean, come on, guys. I need some responses there, because Eric has done a hell of a job, and he keeps picking up these guys. He's working really well, of course, with a head coach that has a strong belief and understanding of how he wants to put together a team. And it's just, it's kind of they are.
Yeah.
There you go.
Well, the other joke was just wait for our Darius Washington, which was, he was the little safety. I mean, I agree with you. Like, think about all the great moves that Eric DeCosta's made. You think about that whole organization in Baltimore where you have him obviously taking over for Ozzie, Ozzie having all that success, but then Eric being kind of one of the forefronts of analytics where you have, Corey Krawick and David McDonald, who worked for you also in Atlanta, and Daniel Stern, who's on the sideline helping John with the in-game decisions. Like, it's a very well-rounded organization. And I think for a lot of times they got a lot of flack because they're like, oh, they're a team that trades back, and they're a team that does, and they're like, well, how much does that gain them? They've only won one playoff game since 2014. And it's like, well, it's really hard to win playoff games in the NFL, Thomas, right? And so now they're looking up, and I think the betting markets would either make them, Kansas City, or San Francisco, the best team in football right now. And I think the only thing, if you're a Ravens fan, that you have to worry about as they try to go for their third Super Bowl is injuries, right? The injuries have always been an issue for them. You talk about Marcus Williams. Somebody brought this up, which again is a very good, I think, point towards Eric DeCosta. They only discovered Geno Stone because Marcus Williams tore his pectoral muscle, right? A guy that they signed in free agency from, but that depth, roster depth, is a function of the general manager and how adept he is at picking players sort of later in the draft. And so, kudos to them. We didn't want to really make it about the Ravens, but the Ravens certainly are a team that's been impressing me so far this season.
Well, I think the only other thing about the Ravens and any of these other teams that have a strong analytics department and systems department, they are one. Of course, Philadelphia is one. We've always talked about this. You talk about the Browns, you talk about Minnesota, whoever you're talking about. Coming back to Eric and his group and your opportunity to laud a guy like David McDonald and some of the people that there, you have a very firm grasp on who's really thriving in this league. And there's no doubt in your mind that the Ravens are one of the top employing data and scientists. It's not just whatever, right? They're literally at the top of their game. Is that correct from your point of view?
Geno Stone is the guy that I think about, right? Like Isaiah Likely is another one. When you make, and again, I'm not trying to give away the sauce here, but when you make a model, right, and you're trying to predict players from college to pro, and teams like Baltimore are picking the same players that you like, that to me it fortifies in my mind that I at least have some clue, because I know how sharp they are. I know how sharp David and Corey are. I know, before it was Sarah, now Sarah's a member with John Park in Dallas. But yeah, I mean, these are people who, I don't know if the NFL, obviously Kwesi became a GM, but Kwesi got a VP job with Andrew Berry, after a few years in San Francisco. He's kind of the first analytics GM. I think if you start to turn the clock forward, maybe half a decade to a decade, the people like Corey, I think, are going to end up being, candidates for these jobs, because it's a league where, and this is, again, like one of the reasons why it's so valuable for me, obviously, to interact with you. It's like there are inner workings of what it really means to be a football evaluator and a team builder and everything. And, if you've been on the Baltimore Ravens and you look at how they've built their team, there's just so much, I think there's so much structure and so many good processes put in place by the Ravens. So, I think if you're looking and you look at their coaching staff too, Mike McDonald's a guy that's probably going to be a head coach next year. He's running one of the better defenses in all of football. Like, that's such a good franchise. And there's no surprise that even though they're injured some years, they're always in the mix.
Always in the mix. Well, look, I didn't mean to spin it around on Ravenville and all that. We've got a lot to talk about, but it's good.
Well, it's good because it actually brings up something that I wanted to think about, because midway point in the season, right, when you're a general manager or a coach or you're just in a team, like, some of these things start coming up actually, right? Like, you have, by the way, Ryan Nelson says Palazzolo has the model. Well, I'm going to tell you guys a secret. Palazzolo's model is my model. But okay, but anyway.
There you go. So keep going. There you go. I'd say it loud.
We built the wins above average model at PFF, and Steve does a really good job of knowing football and making those orders. But it's based upon the wins above average model that my team built, and Steve does a very good job of deploying it and talking about it on the podcast. So I appreciate that. But sure, he can claim it.
I like that. I like that. A little bit of pushback. That's good.
Yeah, but when you're thinking about this time of year, okay, middle of the season, you've had seasons, for example, I think about 2012, you guys like went probably, I think you were undefeated at this point. You think about other years, you turned the clock, you had other years where you had a difficult record at this point in time. And the question being like, what goes through your mind right now is you're simultaneously trying to guide a team to wins, but you're also trying to build the team next year through free agency and the draft. We talk about, and I was going to bring this up. You watch USC versus Washington the other night, and Caleb Williams. Everybody's talking about how Caleb Williams goes over to his mother and cries, and whether or not that's like indicative of him being a top pick. And so all of this stuff is happening where you have one eye to the future and one eye to the present. The trade deadline's over, so you really can't add to your team. What is this time like when you're a general manager, basically building a football team at this point?
Well, again, it's contingent on where you are as a team, to your point, record-wise, right? How your players are playing, how your free agents are playing, your draft players, of course, how they're developing. Every day as a general manager, at least I did with Dan Quinn and Mike Smith, and I'm a big believer, if I were to ever go back in that situation, regular communication. I'm talking about 5 to 10 times a day with the head coach as a GM is vital. If you get those relationships, this is my little diatribe, but if you get those relationships where a head coach and a GM don't communicate but once a week or whatever, to me, that is not what you need. You need regular, lucid communication. And that was a part of what I believed we were. So Dan Quinn and I, to be more in the here and now versus Smitty that many years ago, we would always visit about where we were with the team. We would always go up to our depth charts. And before at the beginning of the day or somewhere during the middle of the day when we had some time, we would talk about the strengths and the weaknesses of our roster. I mean, sometimes overbearing, like we would always revisit it. We had a big thing that we decided that we were going to gauge our CT grade we created. It sounds a lot more complicated than it was, or it is, but it was a competitive toughness grade, right? It was at the core of whatever we did. Competitiveness and toughness were two different things, right? You could be competitive and not be a tough ass, or you could be a tough ass and really not be that competitive, right? When you had both and you had a grade of a 6, 7, or a 7, 8, or 9 as a CT grade, it showed on your depth chart, right? You could see the pockets of your depth chart of, man, our secondary is tough and competitive, but our linebackers are more midline, and our front is, the badass competes, but they're not that competitive, they're not that tough. They're not that gritty, whatever it may be. So we did a lot of that work. And then as a GM, the head coach was go and start doing his work with the team. As a GM, I, at this point, would start really digging into more video, college video, of course. I would set up my schedules more in the last, probably mid-October through November and into December to make sure that I was getting the looks that I truly needed to get. If we were looking at a quarterback, and obviously in Atlanta, we weren't looking for a quarterback my entire time there. Maybe should have been after a backup somewhere along the way, but we weren't because of Matt and his health. And then, we spent a lot of time on that. We start digging in with the pro department and start talking about what's out there in free agency as well. We'll have light free agency meetings during, not necessarily November, but making sure that I had the lists, making sure that I was looking at the players that I thought in the need areas of our team that I needed to have an early eye on, so that when I was talking to our head coach and our personnel group, that I was conversant, with regard to their abilities, right? And there's nothing worse than getting into middle of January and you haven't looked at any potential free agents and you're just playing catch up. So what this is a time to make sure you're at the front of it and make sure you're not always scrambling to try to get to the front, because there are always matters that come up that put you aside. And by the way, very few people, maybe some of these old GMs that sat in and watched video all their lives, but when you're a guy that's expected to manage and generally manage the organization, you start watching vids and you're 40 minutes in or 20 minutes in, and then you have 5 knocks on the door and your EA has got you spun around to different things. And then, oh, by the way, Arthur Blank calls you and he wants you to talk to some, potential sponsor. That doesn't happen all the time. Or, the media people come to you and ask you to do certain things. You are sort of misdirected at times. You got to get your focus back. So without beating this up, there's a lot on a GM's plate this time of year, even though people think, well, why don't you just have your feet up on the proverbial table and just put a dip in and just kind of watch some football. It's so not that. There's a lot more.
By the way, Thomas does not use drugs in any way. Even though he talks about it, I think it's important to point that out. It's so.
Did I say about drugs, or you're talking about dip?
Well, in theory, like a dip is there's a stimulant there, right? And that was one of, by the way, if we're gonna go through stories, growing up, never partook in any of those things. One of the more jarring parts about being a college football player was going from one of the biggest, strongest people on your high school team to showing up to grown men with kids with a dip while you're in meetings and being like, wait a sec, like you're better than me at football, even though you use all these substances. Like, I must really suck. That was like the big jarring part for me as an 18-year-old freshman at Minnesota State. The one question I have is, so how much do you end up anchoring on situation? Like, how much do you make a decision based upon the first part of the season, and how hard is it to move off of that? Like, there are players, like I remember Todd Haley in 2009 when Jamal Charles over the last like 4 or 5 games of the season rushed for like 800 yards. And, and Todd Haley openly admitted at the end, he said, I have to reevaluate. I had written Jamal Charles off, is basically what he said. And I only played him out of necessity, and he became a superstar. And I have to change my evaluation. And frankly, we have to change what we're doing in free agency. And funny, Kansas City still went out and signed Thomas Jones, which is funny. But like, how, because it's funny because everybody like love, in the sports and in media, we all like to think about games and make them into something that they're not. There's not that much information packed into 8 games, but relative to like their whole college career and their whole pro career up until that point. But what is enough in the last 9 weeks or 8 weeks of the season to make you, guys got CT of 4, let's say, and you watch him play over the last little bit, and he becomes a guy who's more of a 6 for you. And how much is that like, well, maybe he's just playing for his next contract, or maybe it's low stakes stuff. Like, how often are you significantly moved by what happens over the last 2 months of the regular season?
Well, let me step back for a second, because I want to make sure that I'm very clear about this. 2 things. One, I didn't express it enough. The CT grade has 2 grades to it, right? So when you're looking C first, T next. So if you have a 6.5, you're saying that his competitive is a 6 and it's good, and his toughness is a 5, it's adequate. Just for it's very basic. I get it, but it's from an analytics standpoint. But that's where you can see where the high grades were and where the lower grades, and if there was a discrepancy. That aside, I think what's very important for the listeners to know, and we've talked about this, and I want you to segue in a little bit of where we are with Sumer on it. I mean, performance gaps and where we are with that in our draft dashboard, and where we are with that with our roster value. Performance gap is huge for a GM to do his work prior to the head coach being finished his work at the end of January, whenever he finishes, so he can jump into spending his time on the true needs of the organization. So although I'm going to be watching most of the draft board, at least the front board, the main board as a GM, my focus early on has to be on the areas of need within your organization. So I'm not going to sit there and watch all the quarterbacks and spend all my time there. If we are crappy at linebacker and tight end, this time of year, I'm going to get a really good gauge on where they are. And I'm going to be going to my head coach every day that we meet, and I'll say, look, I just watched 4 other, tight ends, or I watched these linebackers. We have a chance here. And oh, by the way, I also watched some free agency versus some of the draft. There's a really good group of free agents that are that are more down the road free agents. We don't have to draft high, but we can get the guys we need in free agency. A head coach, even though he's focused on the coaching of it this time of year, He wants to know that his right-hand guy, his GM, although he knows the scouts are doing, he wants to know that the GM has a really good grasp. So when it's time to fold him in, he's properly folded in. That's the true mark, I think, of a very good communicative GM, always keeping your guy up to date. Not only him, sometimes you can do that when you go have a cigar with your owner and you keep him up to date. This comes back to what I said. Every GM in this league, I don't care who they are and where their egos are, whether they're high or low, they all want to be the omniscient one in the damn building when it comes to building and personnel. They don't want their head coach asking questions about players, college or pro, and they don't have an answer. Or if an owner pulls them aside mid-season, this happened to me before. Hey, what do you think about A, B, and C and X, Y, and Z in college and pro? And you're like, I really haven't gotten to them yet. That's a bad answer for that owner, right? Who's paying you $3, $4, or $5 million in today's world a year.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's it's so interesting, right? To have your finger on the pulse. Now, are you able to look at and this is, I think, is where the analytics department can sort of help, right? Do you look at teams that are like, how do you end up being able to look at, let's say, free agents and stuff and be like, okay, this guy's going to be available. This guy's not going to be available. This guy we might not get a look at because of X, Y, and Z on his current team, whereas this guy's going to get a look. Like, I think about Michael Turner, right? And granted, you weren't the GM the year before you signed Michael Turner. You were with the Patriots. But, like, let's assume. So, like, Michael Turner's the backup running back for LaDainian Tomlinson in San Diego. And you're looking at that and you're like, San Diego is falling off a little bit. We might get to see more of Michael Turner relative to LT because they might want to save his legs for the next year when they're more competitive. Like, is that something that's more evidence-based, or is that something that's a little bit more kind of like narrative-driven? And could an analytics department help you? Because I know, like, you've been what's really fun is building this website and this all this stuff with you. You're super interested in the odds, right? Oh, the Falcons went from 48% to 27%. But, like, those odds can inform you as to what kind of looks you're going to get into certain players, specifically quarterbacks, but every kind of player.
Wow, there's a lot there, and I would love to continue to talk about it. And I was going to say, amidst all of this discussion, as far as the data that's available, you have to remember, this is a little aside, but I think it could be interesting for everyone. I'm a big believer in making sure that you had really good relationships in this league, right? My relationships with, of course, when I was in my contemporaries, it was important for me to have honest enough relationships. We're all competing, right, to be the best. Don't get me wrong. But when you have the right relationships and you've done right by your trades and you're not trying to screw people into the ground, then you have relationships where you can inquire with some of your GM contemporaries and say, look, I'm not asking for you to give me the lay of the land, but, is there any chance this free agent and this free agent gets out? Like, let's just say it was a top linebacker. And they're like, look, most of them, if you're good quality acquaintances, will say, keep your eye on it or don't waste your time. Now, that could work in both ways. So there's a lot of that going on too in the league for people to know that. Now, back in the day, there used to be a lot more enemies, but everyone realized if you're going to get trades done in this league, if you're going to get business done, you can't be the old screw it into the ground type. It's funny because that old school was fun to watch, right? There was a character about him. When you watched him on videos and movies, there was a mobster element, right? That does not exist in today's world.
Well, and it's so funny because even when I talk to people in the league, like, I know that there are certain questions I can ask, and I know there are certain questions I can't ask. And there are also questions where it's sort of funny. Like, I think about, there are also questions that I know that if I ask them, I'd be revealing like an ignorance that I don't want to reveal. There's also an element there. But, like, you think about some teams, like, that in the history of certain teams, they've never re-signed a corner, or they've never valued a running back. And so you can, like, kind of look at those patterns that a team undergoes and leverage that for your own good. Speaking of free agents, though, because, this was a part of your time in Atlanta, I do want to talk about one player who, because we're sort of looking at the end of college football season right now, we're looking towards free agency in the drafts. And this player was not only drafted by you, but then got a pretty sizable free agency deal in Jacksonville. I actually want to talk about Foye Oloukun, Thomas, because this is a player who, you know, everybody knows about your Julio pick. Everybody knows about your Matt Ryan pick. Everybody knows, you know, in free agency when you picked up Michael Turner and all that, you know, trade for Tony Gonzalez. But I watched these Jacksonville games, and I'm actually going to bring this up because I think that they deserve some plaudits, because going into the season, I think everybody made Jacksonville the favorite in the AFC South, but they weren't doing it because of their defense. And this is at sumersports.com/team/defensive. When you look at the top defenses in the NFL, you have the Browns, the Ravens, who we talked about today, and then you have the Jaguars in terms of expected points added per play, meaning expected points added is just a fancy way of doing yards per play, but making sure that every single yard has a point attached to it. The Jacksonville Jaguars are forcing teams into the third worst expected points added per play, ahead of teams like Dallas, ahead of teams like San Francisco, New Orleans. And a big reason for that is somebody that you drafted out of not a small school. Yale's not a small school, but out of an Ivy League school, a traditionally non-football school. And, you know, when you think about draft models, you think about building and you know, you're overhearing some stuff in our offices about college to pro models and building stuff and, you know, trying to project and, if a SEC linebacker has this grade, then what is his likelihood of being a success? And if a MAC linebacker plays on Tuesday and Wednesday nights during November has this, and you're looking at Yale, right? Like this Ivy League linebacker that PFF probably didn't even slap a grade on it when he was in college. Just take me through the process of like evaluating him, pulling the trigger on taking him. He was the 200th pick in the draft, led the NFL in tackles in 2021, which is, you know, after you were gone, but still obviously your pick. And then he goes to Jacksonville as a free agent, gets the $15 million a year deal, leads the league in solo and total tackles last year. This year, he's been the leader of this defense, had a touchdown on Thursday night against New Orleans in a big win there. I mean, that's like a phenomenal story, right? And it's probably one of the cool parts about doing your job, watching a player like that succeed. Like, what was the process of identifying him, selecting him, watching him, develop behind Devondre Campbell and Deion Jones to who he's been now?
Yeah, I mean, it starts off with the fact that you have an adept area scouting group. They're so underrated in an organization. They're so important for the early rungs of, you know, building up what you're doing as far as trying to figure out what your next draft class is. Our scouting group, I thought, did a great job digging up, you know, some of those guys that were down the line that might, you know, not get to our coaches, right? Because ultimately, what our area scouts, what you want them to do is pinpoint the guys that need that much more work. They can project them like, this guy is a good, fast athlete. Now, he's more straight line than not, right? If you watch him, but he played some safety. And the key here, by the way, is versatility. And I'm gonna segue into a little offshoot here. I would say that for anyone, by the way, even outside of football. I'm talking about in a business. If you came to join Sumer Sports, my feeling is the more you can have personally, I think the more that you can have versatility to your being. So some Swiss Army knife, not saying it detracts from your focus, but if management, CEOs, you know, founders and chairmen can look at you and say, wow, this person, this gal or this guy has multi-layers of ability and versatility to move around. That's a big thing. It's a big thing for offensive linemen. It's a big thing for management. It's a big thing for a coaching staff member. It's a big thing for the marketing side. So I just want to say that was him, right? He was versatility through and through. That's why we were so interested. Not because, you know, he went to Yale, of course, you know, Yale's a great education, you know, education and all that academic school, but we weren't sure where he was going to be. Jeff Ulbrich, to his credit, saw the speed, saw the explosives, saw the way that he learned in his mind. And he developed a leadership about him really early on, which we thought was really, really good. By the way, 200th pick overall that draft.
Yeah.
one behind Tom Brady. I always found that kind of amazing. That's not fair to say. I'm just saying you can find your cats there at whatever position. So,
well, here's an anecdote just from like my playing career, and I know you played in college as well, and probably could resent, like when I played wide receiver in high school and the first couple of years of college, I didn't know anything about what the guards and the tackles and the running backs and everything were doing. When I moved to tight end, I had to know, like if I was lined up tight end right, I had to know what the left guard's assignment was in order to understand the context of what I was doing. And it made me understand the game of football better. I would probably still be where I am now if I just played wide receiver in college. But I do think that there's an element of the same thing's true. Like in business, like I don't know what it's like to be a CEO, but I know what it's like to be a leader in some ways. And so I know, like on a day like today, like when you have a million things that you're juggling, what I need to do as far as, let's prepare for the podcast with the context that Thomas has to have these 7 calls today or these 7 things today. Or, being a data scientist, like I know how to lead data scientists because I've been one before, right? And I think when you're looking at football players who can understand the context, especially at linebacker, where, you can't just be a will linebacker in the NFL anymore. Offenses are moving and shifting, and you go from being a Sam to a will in a particular snap. Like you really have to understand why, even if you're out of position, if you can be like a replacement level person, then there's a real value there.
There's a real value, and I love it. Those were the fun ones, every once in a while when you're like trying to dig into what your staff is presenting, and it's fun as a scout to know that sort of the genesis of that player moving through your organization and interest to the spot of where you get together. And by the way, just so everyone knows, most teams now have a scout that is an expert in an area. Once he finishes his work across the country, evaluating all positions, they usually, at least any of us in the Patriot paradigm and beyond, everyone kind of focuses in on a position. So the linebacker expert was really dialed in on Foye, right? And he would bring it to Jeff Albrecht, and Albrecht would get excited, start doing his work, and then he would start rising up the ranks, right? That's a great feeling as a scout, right? That their coach is listening to you, and now your GM and your head coach are really in on it. It's a real buzz. I know it sounds fairly basic, but it's why you're there, right? To feel like you're having some input in the building of a very good, tough, aggressive football team. And he's, for the people that graded him well, the people that followed him, they're not walking around with that on their chest like I was the guy, because it's an organizational pick, but they feel good, especially, you can say that that's the same thing about Devondre Campbell, right? We picked some good players like a lot of teams did. When they go somewhere else and they get cut or we don't re-sign because we don't think as an organization we should, and they go somewhere else and they thrive, there are many reasons for that. But it is a little bit of a feather in the cap from where it all started, and that's at the area scouting level. So,
yeah, that makes sense. It's got to be so nice. I mean, I can't relate to this as being somebody who's never scouted or picked a player, but like even like back when you're a professor and you're saying, when you're saying, I developed this person as a professor, and then they go on to be like a robotics professional or I have interns now work for the Lions and the Jets and stuff. It's just so much fun to see them kind of mature. So this has been a good conversation. I know we're going to cut it a little bit short. It's a busy Wednesday, as everybody can imagine. Thomas is in the office with a billion people. Look, let's just say it as it is. When Thomas is in here getting to talk to me, they're all jealous. So he's got to go back out there with the commoners and spin up some football analysis. So we're going to end a little bit early today. This has been a lot of fun. A lot of good people in the mentions as well. If you like what you heard on this podcast, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, tell a friend about this show. We're starting to post on Threads as well, in addition to Twitter. Please subscribe to the show. We're less than 200 subscribers away from 3,000, which would mean a lot to my ego, maybe not Thomas's as much. And write a review, because Thomas really likes those reviews. So for Thomas Dimitroff, for Eric Eager, this has been the Sumer Sports Show.